Forests are ecosystems characterized by a dense community of trees, and they play a great role in society's well-being. According to Food and Agriculture Organization (FAO) report on the state of the world's forests 2020, forests cover 31% of the global land area, which is 4.06 billion hectares. Uganda's forest cover has declined from 24%, that's 4.9 million hectares in 1990, to 9%, that is 1.8 million hectares in 2018, accounting for a loss of 3 million hectares in just 25 years. This is due to the growth in human population and corresponding increase in demand for forest products and land use. In our EcoPlus program today, we bring you the Executive Director of National Forestry Authority, NFA, Tom Obong Okello, to enlighten us more on the status of forests in Uganda, challenges faced by the sector, and way forward in managing the forestry sector.
The highest rate of deforestation, indeed, is on the private land. And if we are to reverse, then we must address the issues which are on forests, on private land. I've already told you about the degradation in northern Uganda for charcoal, livestock. It is on private land, not on government forest land. So yes, in the countryside, because that is where agriculture is, that is where we are seeing the highest rate of deforestation. Government land is really, the area is restricted, the area is too small. By the way, even if you reforest all the government land, you cannot increase the forest cover unless you also increase forest cover on the private land, which constitute a bigger proportion of the land in the country. So whatever land use plans we do, we must try to encourage people to have trees on their land. And I'm going to talk about it shortly. So what are we doing? We want to improve the management of this forest amidst the limited resources. And by resources, I'm looking at manpower, I'm looking at funding, I'm looking at the equipment for forest management. These days, we are trying to be innovative. We are moving away from the manual monitoring of forests. We are doing both manual, but we're also doing technology. We have the unmanned vehicles, which we can fly, the drones. We also use a lot of geographical information system and remote sensing while we are seated in the office here, and then we can see what is happening in the forest reserves. So those are the new innovations which we are doing. We are encouraging tree planting. If you remember, government of Uganda came up with an ambitious plan of planting for at least 40 million trees per year. This plan hit a small snag because we are not getting enough money to raise the seedlings to meet the 40 million target. So this is also something which I really want to implore all ourselves and our partners. We really need to get these seedlings so that we meet this government objective of planting at least 40 million trees per year. And this was part of the government program under the National Development Plan 3.
Mr. Okello explained the value of forests.
The values of forests it can be scientifically estimated. All these forests have values. Now, without any calculation, first of all, you very much know that some of these forests are water catchments. Some rivers begin from the forest. So, for example, if you go and look for River Kafu, where it is starting, River Inkusi, where they almost start from the same area, somewhere in Kagadi district. You will see that that it is a forested area. It is an hilly area, forested. So the fact that it is holding water and giving that volume which is going, though it is joined by others, but it is a start for some river, which we can measure the amount of timber which is in the forest. Forest give us the biodiversity, where you can go and do tourism. If, for example, you want to know the value of Bwindi, Impenetrable National Park, where it is a forest, gorilla tourism, how much money is gorilla tourism bringing to Uganda? So what I want to say is that the oxygen coming from the forest, free of charge, reducing the temperatures, free of charge. So those ones do what we call a total economic valuation of a forest, like Mabira. We can give you the figure and tell you Mabira perhaps is worth 50 billion US dollars. That's when you realize why we should conserve Mabira, because you may not get an alternative to what Mabira is providing. So forests play tangible products which you can see, tourism, timber, water coming from there, herbs, medicinal plants, but also birds for tourism, but also forest gives you that the services which you don't see. What we call the carbon sequestration, where it is removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. That one you don't see. It is ameliorating the microclimate of the area. It is catching rain, catching winds, holding winds and providing rain. It is also doing evapotranspiration from the trees and providing rain. So those ones you don't see, but those are services which, what we call environmental services, which the forests give. But we can do a total economic valuation and give you an exact value of a forest.
Asked to comment on why National Forestry Authority over-restricts public from accessing forestry reserves like Semrik Forest Reserve and failure by government to compensate people evicted from forest land, he elaborated.
We need to perhaps get the right information, because we have two forests there. There is what we call the North Rwenzori Forest Reserves, which is under National Forest Authority. But we also have the Semliki National Park, which is under Uganda Wildlife Authority. That is the national park. As you slope down after the escarpment. So that is the national park. And yes, I know something about that national park. The issue is, before it was a forest reserve. So when it was a forest reserve, it was easier for the communities to access those resources. But when it became a national park, then you can access it through an arrangement, what we call the resource access agreements. So it is still allowed for you to get the herbs which you need, but it is not that you just walk in and pick. No, this is a national park, there are wild animals there. You need to get an arrangement which allows you to go and access these resources. And that arrangement is provided for under the Uganda Wildlife Act, even under the National Forest and Tree Planting Act. Those arrangements are there. They only need to be organized. You don't just walk, you need to be organized into a group. You sign what we call a resource access agreement with the relevant authority, that is the Uganda Wildlife Authority, and then you will be allowed to pick those resources. Now, the cutting of trees, I also need to make a comment. I think the trees which were cut some 3 years ago were not indigenous trees. Those trees were planted by the forest department when it was a forest reserve. Now, the national park is removing the indigenous trees, the exotic trees, because they were in a wrong place. They're in a wrong place. So they're removing it so that the indigenous trees can colonize the area. And that tree species practically was called Terminalia. Many of them were Terminalia superba. I fortunately did my research in that place, so I know the place very well. I did my postgraduate research in that national park. So I even saw those trees when they were growing at that time. So they have been removed to allow for colonization by indigenous trees. And I think the last point I wanted to give about what can be done is innovations in forestry management. We need to sift, we need a paradigm shift from the traditional forestry. Yes, traditional forestry is saying, the local people can manage, we need to only grow this type of trees. That is right. We need now to start balancing conservation with the needs of the people, because the population is increasing, the demand for these resources is increasing. How do we maximize the coexistence? So this one needs an innovative approach. Now, there was these issues of the cutting of the trees in Semliki, because somehow people thought, why are they removing those trees? Yes, they are removing those trees because they're in the wrong place. Yes, they are trees, they're supposed to be in a forest, but these forests are gazetted for reasons. There are purposes for gazettement. Now, if the purpose for gazettement is biodiversity conservation, like now it is for Semliki National Park, then you are not going to bring cassia trees. The level of, let me say, if for example you go to a pine forest, and then you go to a tropical high forest, the level is completely different. So the indigenous tropical high forest conserves better than the planted forest. So that is the reason why they are removing them. They have become too many, and they are shedding and killing all the other indigenous trees. So they had to remove them so that we have the right trees in the right place for the right purpose. Because I was telling you, these forests are gazetted for particular purposes. Some are water catchments, others are for biodiversity, others are for soil, but others are for industrial products. For example, when you are growing pines, we are doing it to provide the timber, to provide the plywood, to provide these products. These are products from pine, by the way. They have only covered it. This is what we call the MDFs, the medium density fiber boards. So their purposes for planting this tree. The people who are staying there were encroachers. And they were encroachers. By the way, when I was doing my research, most of that place had matoke. So that time they had been removed because they wanted conservation to take over. So they were in the wrong place. They were not supposed to be there. So you cannot be compensated when you're in the wrong place. If you're in the right place and government want your land, they will compensate you. You have seen people being compensated for road works when the roads are passing your area. But when you go and settle in a national park, in a forest reserve, first of all, the land is not available for settlement because the purpose is not for settlement. The purpose is for a different thing. So when you are found there and they are telling you to leave, I think please politely leave so that we don't cause more ulabalo and more harm in what we are doing.
Maira Forestry Reserve is one of Uganda's largest surviving natural forests, covering an area of 306 square kilometers. We asked Mr. Okello as to why we continue to see many homesteads and economic activities taking place in the reserve.
The issue of Maira is, I think, a matter of people not knowing Maira. And also it is a matter of the increase in population, which I've talked about. When you drive through Maira, because I know for you I've driven through Maira several times, you are not in Maira throughout. You enter Maira, the forest, then you go to an enclave, which is a community land, then you enter the forest, then you get to an enclave. That is the story of Maira. Maira has 12 enclaves. These are villages which are within the forest reserves. So as you are driving, you are not entirely in Maira. You enter the forest, you get out. Now, in those days where you are getting out, the population were few. So there were fewer people. But now you may be noticing that the number of people are increasing. The houses are increasing, but those houses are not in Maira. They're in a village which is inside Maira. If you want to know better, you see those roads which are entering. Those roads are going to villages which are inside Maira, but they're not part of Maira Central Forest Reserve. So when the Bazungus were gazetting Maira in 1932, those villages were already there. So they left them to continue remaining. But at that time, the population were few. So you will not notice their impact. In fact, the villages were also forested. But now the forests in the villages are finished. And it is becoming a big threat to the forest in the forest reserve. So when you are going in Maira, don't think that you will drive from Najembe where you enter. Don't think you'll be in the forest until when you come out in the tea estate. No, you will get in, get out, get in again, and then get out. So that is what is happening there.
Last year, President Yoweri Museveni put a ban on commercial charcoal burning and cutting of trees for timber in northern and eastern Uganda respectively, unless if one is permitted by the relevant authorities. NFA believes the move has yielded positive results.
The one of northern Uganda, the charcoal production was out of hand. That is true. All the charcoal producers in this country were in northern Uganda, from Kabale, from Masaka, from Bale. They were all in northern Uganda. And the rate at which they were burning charcoal was so alarming. There were several businessmen now. All the businessmen dealing in charcoal were also in northern Uganda. So the president thought it wise that we need to manage our environment. And one way was to, first of all, stop that charcoal production. And it was stopped. And it has yielded very good results. If you travel to northern Uganda before that ban, from Kampala to Karuma, you would meet several trucks carrying charcoal. But if you drive tomorrow, perhaps you will see one or two, and some of them will claim they are bringing charcoal from southern Sudan, which we really need to also investigate. But the president also said, yes, you can clear your land for agriculture, and you can burn the charcoal, but you must get permission from the resident district commissioner. So there are people, I've already seen one letter which was written by the RDC of Nakapiripirit to the Minister of Water and Environment, because that is the procedure now which is supposed to be done. So it has yielded some good results.
In a bid to restore forest cover in Uganda, a lot is being done by National Forestry Authority.
We are trying to encourage partnerships. We are working with the private sector. Already, so many have got involved in funding this initiative, for example, under what we call Roots, that is running out of trees initiative. We have Stanbic Bank. We have other partners coming on board to try to contribute to this initiative. We're also working with development partners, the World Bank, USAID, and international NGOs, the Worldwide Fund for Nature, the Wildlife Conservation Society, African Wildlife Foundations, trying to restore some degraded forest reserves and also reopen boundaries of the forest reserves so that they can become known and seen from far to avoid deforestation. Now, we need adequate funding if we are to save this forest, because with funding you can do a lot. We also need to reopen boundaries. I've already talked about them, reopening and demarcating the boundaries of the forest reserves. But also we need to promote collaborative forest management. We need to bring on board the neighboring communities, because these are people who have been living with these resources. And many people traditionally think that the communities can best manage these resources. Yes, they manage these resources before the coming on board of the colonial masters and gazetting these areas and say this is government area. But you see, at that time you must be mindful of the population. You must be mindful of the mindset of the people at that time, and also the level of greed which they had at that time compared to now, the corruption which we had at that time compared to now. So yes, many people still think, these people can manage this, but I can assure you, where we have reached now, they alone may not do it. But we want to encourage collaborative approaches, especially looking at issues to do with the livelihoods of this community. Government has come up with a number of programs. We have heard about the Paris Development Model. We have the collaborative forest management arrangements, which is a form of a benefit sharing, so that these people can also benefit from the existence of these forest reserves, so that they can conserve it. Promotion of alternative livelihoods. But also we must look at alternative forest products, because you see, if we are to rely on the naturally growing trees only, it may not be sustainable. I've already talked about the population increase and the needs which comes as a result of the population increase. So we need to look at alternative products, alternatives like on-farm growing of trees. I told you it is one of the ways of addressing the forest cover change in the country. We need to encourage people to grow trees on farm, where in your farm you can do a boundary planting along the boundary of your farmland. You put some trees, or you can demarcate the different plots also with trees. I've already talked about partnerships, partnership for funding. There's also partnership for skills development for the forest managers, but also partnerships for technology transfer. We really need improved technology. I've talked about technology for forest monitoring. There is one we have done with the United Nations Development Program, what we call the National Natural Resource Information System, NARIS, where we have equipment, the drones for management of, for monitoring of the forest. Let us rethink what we have done to nature. There are people who are on wetlands. You know, there are people who get plots on Easter every year. Start filling on Friday because they know people are not working. On Saturday is filling. On Sunday is leveling. On Easter Monday he has a plot. I think let us love our country. Let us be patriotic enough and feel for our country. Remember, nature can live without us, but we cannot live without nature at our current level of development and economic development. So be mindful of what we are doing to the environment. Think about others. Think about the future. Think about the future generation. If the people who lived here 50 years ago were careless like us, perhaps we will not be seeing this forest. Perhaps I would have no job. So let us think about the job requirement for the future generation.
As we relate with our forests and other natural resources, let's be mindful of the great importance they play in our environment.